Welcome to Heartwork. This is a podcast where we have conversations about principles, practices, and purpose aimed at helping young people.
Matt, could you start by giving our audience a little bit of intro, who you are, what you do, where you came from, those kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my name is Matt Pisani, and I am the founder of Clean Slate Living. It's a nonprofit that's based here in New York, and we've been reaching out to children, teenagers, and young adults for the last almost 10 years. And it's just been an awesome adventure how we've been able to reach people in the secular audiences specifically, and even in ministry platforms as we've gone to churches and youth groups and done a lot of mission work. So it's been a lot of fun just being able to share with people the opportunity to rewrite tomorrow, which basically I've always broken it down to just starting fresh, cleaning your slate, and we declare people's self-worth into their lives as we share our own testimonies, our own stories of how we cleaned our slate.
That's awesome. How did this Clean Slate Living, how did that come about?
Yeah, well, this is a really cool place for me to share this with the young adult audience. It's basically something that came under a heart of servitude. When I came back to the Lord 2010, which seems like a really long time ago. It was basically 2009 going into 2010. I wanted to serve in the church, so I started serving in the church, and then I eventually started serving in the young adults ministry. Now, back then I was the very young age of 30 years old, I believe, or maybe it was 31. I think it was 31. So just to show you where I was in my season of life, I had a lot to give to a young adult, and I wanted to pour into them. So I served as young adult leader under my very good friend, Pastor Stephen Zarlingo, and there I learned how to not only serve that community, but also serve the neighboring community at large. And as we started to do outreach, there were certain giftings that would manifest through me. God would allow me to do certain things that I didn't realize I still had the gift for. In other words, from speaking in public to doing music. So the mission of Clean Slate Living truly evolved and came into fruition through me serving in the young adults community, us doing outreach, and then eventually me bringing it to the pastoral staff and saying, hey, I think I have this idea and vision that God has given me to do outreach in a different way without saying that I'm a Christian. In other words, a backdoor evangelism style way of sharing the love of Jesus in places where you can't say the name of Jesus.
That's really cool and encouraging when you went to being able to go to your church and say, hey, I got this idea, and they have supported you this whole time. I know that I've personally been to, I don't know if you're still doing the sneakers and or the suits and sneakers kind of stuff, but I've personally been to those kinds of fundraisers and seen what you guys do when you do go into a school. So, and it's really cool. I think if you've never seen it before, a lot of people, you kind of think about, we do school presentations, and you kind of get this idea in your head of what that looks like, but it doesn't look like a typical school presentation. Could you talk a little bit about what that actually looks like when you guys go into schools, and how you even up to the minute of starting the presentation, how you kind of determine what's going to take place?
Yeah, it's a very interesting experience when you go into an auditorium of 1,000 students, and the one thing they don't want to hear is a lecture. So what we usually do is we let them know right from the beginning, like, they're going to have fun. This isn't a lecture, but we actually love you guys. And I always say it's not a romantic love, like I love my wife, but it's like a care, and it's a love that we know where they've been because we've already been there. So they come in, there's some icebreakers, as we know in the youth group world, right? There's some free giveaways, there's secular music playing that's decently appropriate, right? We try to find stuff that's decent. We're like, can I play this without like feeling a deep conviction or feel like it's got a bad message? So we'll play certain songs that we know that they can recognize. And right away, we've generated this idea that this is different. We're not just listening to a motivational speaker. From there, it transitions into video media. I share a little bit about my story, and part of my testimony was that I was an aspiring hip-hop artist for several years of my life, and I rap for the kids. So right away, it's like instant credibility, shock value. Like, I didn't know this guy could rap. Why does he know how to rap? Why is it decent? At least some people have told me it's decent. And then from there, it goes into all these different phases of our journey of self-worth together. And by the end of it, during it, kids are crying, they're sobbing, because they're having an encounter with the Father. They're realizing that, wow, these people actually care about me. We're not just talking about people that said that they used to be somebody and that's just how they got sober, or like these usual suspect type of assemblies, or don't do drugs, and then everyone goes and does, still does what they want to do. It's been more of a deeper rooted thing where we're like speaking into their lives and telling them, you're not the reason your dad left. You're not the reason your mom and dad aren't together. Like giving them specific truths that they needed to hear. It's almost like a weight is lifted off them. So it's definitely a presentation that's bathed and I believe covered in prayer. I know you've prayed for us throughout the years for when we do these things. A lot of people around the country intercede through prayer, and that's really important for the young adult audience to hear today, is that the prayer is what truly gave an anointing to Clean Slate. It wasn't just me having a really good business idea, because I've had many of those that have failed. This was something that we really brought to the feet of Jesus and said, like, what do you want to do with this? And every time we go into a public school, it looks different. So even if I tried to always explain it the same way, it couldn't be that way. It always changed every time we've seen it, because God has plans within these moments and we allow him to move in those plans. And I guess I would kind of end it with, it's not just a spontaneous, crazy, like, oh, we'll just see what happens. Like, there's a lot of preparation that goes into this specific plan to share with the young people, but we leave room for God to move in moments where they get really intimate and real serious. And then at the end, it allows the students to come to us one-on-one and ask deeper questions, like, what truly made you clean your slate? And we've had kids that are from church land, right, from our group, from our church family at large, and say, I know what you're doing. You guys are Christian. And they like have these aha moments. And then you have other people that are super hardened, but we're able to bridge them to the local advisor, administrator, or services they need in the community. So we're truly the bridge. And then obviously the social media component helps add some follow-up. So yeah.
Yeah, I think back to my time in South Carolina, and when we brought you guys in, and funny enough, there was some flight issues, and so one of the members of the team was coming from Dallas, I believe, and so he got there, and so it was me and him the first couple of schools, and we're waiting on Matt to get there because I feel like we don't know what we're doing, but honestly, oh, and there goes my timer light. There it is. We're back. But I remember one of the team members coming in from Dallas, and so it was me and him going, and I felt like we didn't really know what we were doing. I didn't really know what I was doing. We're like on the way driving to the school, and Craig is explaining to me like what I'm supposed to do with the programs and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But what was incredible about that experience was it was exactly what that group of kids needed, and what I see and I don't remember how many schools we went to that week, but we went to several, and every single one of them looked different. And what I remember about that week, which is powerful for me, but also a little nerve-wracking for me as somebody that works on staff at a church, is like you guys didn't have it planned out to a T, because they all look different. You really sought the Lord in prayer beforehand, and even up to like the start of it, as far as who's going to speak, what they're going to share, those kinds of things, and it was really incredible to just see the obedience to the Spirit that you guys really have, and so there are a ton of different directions that we could go in, talking about those what your ministry does, and the thing that stuck out to me was that the people in your circle, they see they see what you're doing, right. And so I think that. And maybe you might agree with this, but I think that in the 21st century, we're going to have to get a little creative about how we do things. And so I guess what would you say to a young adult that's maybe got this idea that of something that they could do and some of the first steps that they might be able to take, as far as you had mentioned, you went to your church and got support there. But what are some of the first steps that, if I had this idea that I really thought could change people's lives, how do I get started?
Yeah, well, I would definitely recommend seeking godly counsel. People that you trust. I went to people that were professionals in their field that I trusted would give me the right guidance on the corporate side of things, right? Like going to the right person that was an accountant, that was a godly man who I knew and trusted, that could help me develop the paperwork to fill out the 501c3, right? That's like some of the business stuff that you want to make sure. Going to a godly attorney. I wanted to make sure that I was doing things with integrity. I went, of course, to the pastoral leadership because I wanted their prayer covering. A lot of times I've seen people go to pastoral leadership or go to leadership like, I heard you guys have the money to help me start something. As we know in church world, that's not always the case. Not everyone is a mega church with a huge bankroll. So I think for me, it was more like, hey, I don't know what you guys can help me with, but can we just like pray in how we can develop whatever it is. And then prayer and fasting, as far as that goes, everyone has a different maturity level, how to do that, or how God would put that on your heart. But prayer and fasting was a big part of me discerning through the actual name. Every little element that we think is just something quick, like I really tried to give that to the Lord. So there's a process that I believe it's not to over spiritualize it, but it's just to like let people know, like, hey, like really bring this to God. Don't try to get too far ahead of what He wants to do, because you could be a visionary like me, and I've done it where I've failed, because I'll get ahead of what He's trying to do, and I start back at square one. And I'll give you like one example of that. Through this process, I thought at one point we were supposed to build a music studio, and we had the space, and I had guys building it from the church, and I sewed into it financially, and we're going to build this thing, and we're going to have people come in and make godly, clean slate music, and I guess I missed it because I ended up at a platinum recording studio in the area, right? That in New York, that where all these plaques on the walls, and like J-Lo, NSYNC, all these famous people. And the guy's like, "What if you recorded here?" And I was just kind of like, "But I'm building a studio." And he's like, "Yeah, but you need to work on like what you're good at. Like, are you really good at building a studio? Really good at engineering?" And in other words, don't get distracted with all the little things that you think need to get done, because God will provide those people to help you pursue His mission and do His will. So that's something I would recommend to anyone that has an idea. And then just keep it simple. Like, we kept it so simple, and I think that's the only way that sometimes these things work. You don't have to overcomplicate it. You don't have to feel like it's got to be like this big idea. It's just something simple and practical that will lead to a great result.
That's really good. And even speaking to me a little bit right now, Matt, because we're in the process of changing youth ministry, at least senior high youth ministry, the way it's always been done. We're going to do it a little bit differently. And the thing about it is it's going to take a large portion of our church to get involved and get behind this vision. And it's a little terrifying, but just hearing you say those kinds of people will come alongside of you, and God will provide them. If it's truly of God, then He will provide. And I've already seen things like I don't know if you're gifted a similar way, but administratively is not my strong suit. Logistics and final details. That's not where I thrive. But I've had somebody, oddly enough, in our church that has 20 years of youth ministry experience, but is in a place where they can't, because of their child and taking care of their kid, they're not able to dedicate, leading a group or being part of our weekly gatherings. But this person's planning to help me administratively, and I can't tell you that like how valuable that is. And will be going forward. I mean, even simple things, Matt, like the fact that it's going to be a lot of people, and the fact that we got to get background checks done for all those people. Like, I mean, it's just, it is overwhelming. And so to really focus on, where your strength is, where the vision is, and kind of and pray for those things to come around you and stay focused. That's super important, I think. You had mentioned a little bit ago, and I won't put you on the spot yet, but maybe I will towards the end. But you had mentioned that you kind of had a previous little dabble into hip hop, and then all of a sudden you came back to church. You mentioned coming back to church. So could you talk about that journey a little bit?
Yeah, so I was a church kid, dedicated to the Lord at a small church in the area that became a mega church in the eyes of living on Long Island, which is a section of New York out in Suffolk County. So I'm not in New York City, just so everyone understands that. Everyone always thinks if you say New York, you must be like in Brooklyn or something. I'm not from there. But with that, hip hop culture was something that I was attracted to, rebellious with. And I think it was because it was like rock and roll for a lot of us growing up. And I was around a lot of the people that did it. So it was ultimately something that really caught my attention as a young person. I'm talking about literally 5 years old. Someone gave me a cassette tape of Run DMC. I started getting introduced to the Beastie Boys, all these classic hip hop artists in the 80s. So now everyone, young adults, whoa, this guy's really old. So I followed that rhythm of the music into the 90s. Always had a spirit of just joy and happiness. Always was a happy kid. But I did deal with bullying. I was bullied at a very young age, physically beat up in my block, suburban block. It wasn't like it was in the city. I didn't live in the projects, but I lived in a neighborhood where, we were blue collar, middle class people, and people had different backgrounds, and I was a target. So physically being bullied, having issues with my identity, going to church but not having a deep relationship with Jesus led me into a little bit of confusion, some anger, and then eventually it excelled into me getting into fights, feeling like I had to stand up for myself in certain situations. And then I realized that I had inherited a gift of anger that was passed down to me generationally, and I'll kind of tie that in a minute. So here I was getting into fights, finding my identity as I hit puberty, working out. All these things were happening where I learned that I could actually play sports decently. So now as an athlete, I learned that I could rhyme. So now I'm spitting rhymes and doing battles. So I found my identity and my security in some of my talents and not in who I was in Christ. And real quick, I started dabbling with alcohol, and that was on and off since I was very young. I've shared this in Clean Slate messages at times when it was appropriate. Like the first time I had a drink, I was at my cousin's wedding in Maryland, and I was only 7 years old. I asked my mom to verify the age. I was on 7, where I drank champagne. I snuck it at a table and I got drunk. So in other words, the addiction strongholds, the things that were in my family lineage, from alcoholism to anger, was all falling upon me. I was going into agreement with this stuff spiritually, and I needed that broken. I had a radical encounter with the Holy Spirit and with Jesus when I went to a youth retreat in my teenage years. Knew God was real, but still was wrestling with acceptance going to a public school. So I easily tried to put on my church hat when it was convenient and then put on my worldly hat. And eventually the enemy was able to deceive me into a lifestyle of drug addiction, alcohol, hip hop, just worldly lifestyle stuff. And it's not to condemn or go against anyone that's dealing with that, because I was there. But it really opened up my eyes that as I got older, and this is how cool God is. God was pursuing me in moments where I was in deep despair, on spring break, in college now, right? We'll get to young adult life. I'm the party animal. I'm the Van Wilder of college. I'm whatever the epitome was of the party animal guy. I tried to do that, and I had to keep up with that reputation in college. So I was in Panama City, Florida, spring break, did an MC battle. I think I won a satellite radio thing and won all these PlayStation games, and I was living my best life with all my friends, drinking, and we were getting a van ride home to our hotel, and it was free. And, and I didn't realize it until it hit me when we got in the car, when the girls around me were like, hey, can we tell you about Jesus? And I was like, oh. And right then and there I had this unique encounter with a young sister in the Lord who was like, hey, I just want to tell you how much Jesus loves you. And I got super defensive. I was like, nah, I'm a Christian. I know who Jesus is. She's like, hey, would you come tomorrow morning for pancakes? And we're going to show this movie called The Passion of Christ. And I was just like, oh, and my buddies are freaking out. Like, here we are, like in this van, having a huge conviction on how we were living our lives, whether they knew who Jesus was or they didn't. But it was like a sobering wake-up call to me that if I was to die at that moment, I was going to hell. And it couldn't like really totally connect with where I was as far as my maturity level and my spirituality, because I was so messed up with like alcohol and other things. But what did I do? I went into a time of shame and condemnation, went years later into drugs and alcohol and immorality. And finally I got to the point where I could not get high anymore and I couldn't get drunk anymore. The amounts and the levels of tolerance that I had grown where nothing was fulfilling. And I literally New Year's Eve 2009, going into 2010, I felt like God finally said to me, it's time. And I got really freaked out because I was literally in a moment where I was doing something that was not good, right? I had a key, I had cocaine, I was in a bathroom stall on a New Year's Eve night, right? And I felt like I heard this voice say to me, I know I'll have a problem if I start doing this by myself. So that was the phrase I always had through the years of if I was doing drugs, I don't have a problem if it's social, but if I do it by myself, if I ever catch myself by myself abusing alcohol or drugs, I'll know I have a problem. And that was the first time it hit me that, wow, I'm like really living this lifestyle of being an addict. And I just never came to grips with it. So a couple of weeks later into that downward spiral, because I wasn't going to surrender right away. I just didn't know how to because I've had so much shame and guilt. I finally gave it to the Lord. I recommitted my life to Him. I got plugged into a men's ministry where I learned from other godly men what it meant to be a man of God. I stayed away from all of my stuff from the world. In other words, certain friendships just had to go. Others I got really bold with, where they chose to hang around, which is awesome. Some of them are still my friends to this day, and that's amazing. Toxic relationships had to go. So God like cleaned house, truly cleaned my slate, and it allowed me to move forward with humility, love, and restoration. So that's a very long-winded explanation, but I just wanted the young adults to understand like how much God can do in your life so quick, so fast. I mean, we're talking 2009 going to 2010. That year of 2010 was a whole restructuring of my lifestyle. And then by 2011, I'm seeking pastoral leadership to start clean slate living, but still doing it with accountability and, of course, people to help pour into it and not just trying to make it the Matt show. And I think that was just such a move of God's love and grace and mercy on my life to say, like, look how much I love you. Look how much I purposed for you to do something for my kingdom. Like, look what you came out of. Like, you don't even look like the guy that you used to be. And people don't even believe that you're that person anymore. In other words, when you tell them about that, and Journey, you've seen some of my old pictures of what I used to look like versus now. Like, there's transformation in that renewal and coming into a personal relationship with Jesus. And I would never, ever, ever say like, oh wow, like I wish I could have had more of that other lifestyle. Like that was such an emptiness compared to what God has given me now. Like this is priceless, having that specific moment in time where you say, I repent, and I'm now giving my life to Him.
Yeah, that's incredible, Matt. Thanks for sharing that. And I know that has resonated personally with me, and I've seen it resonate with a lot of young people throughout your presentations and things like that. The one thing like that, one of the couple things that stuck out when you shared that was the fact that you're walking through all this in 2009 and 2011 kind of clean slate living is born. And again, like I can't speak to the, I can't speak enough to the fact that, your pastoral leadership valued you so much that they said, let's pour into this guy. Let's run with this idea. 2 years after, your lifestyle looked very, very different. A lot of people, their first instinct would be to run away from that. Say, give it a couple of years, Matt. Let's make sure you're on the right track before we go down this path. And so I think that's really cool, how your leadership poured into that. The other thing was the idea that a lot of your friend circle, got got axed, for lack of a better word.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's an important part of really anybody that's especially anybody that's coming into faith later on in life. And I had a similar experience in my teens. But talk about if you don't mind, talk about this idea that we're living in the world, but we're not living of the world. And so we should seek to have friendships with those that are far from Jesus. But like, where's that line? Like, you can't get dragged back into that old lifestyle, but you're still called to live for purpose and to lead people to Jesus. So how do you draw that line, or what have been some examples in your life where that's kind of played out?
Yeah, I think that for the relationships where I was pouring in and that other person may not be doing the same, or maybe that person was constantly rejecting where I was at, or maybe that person was just trying to lead me back into an old behavior or an old lifestyle choice, then that's an easy, like, hey, like, I love you, but I can't continue to do the things that you want to do. And some people would take that as rejection. Some friends might say, oh, you're a hypocrite. Oh, but it's really like, no, like, I love you, but I hate sin, and I don't want to fall. So, I could give one example of a friend of mine who was my housemate. I'm back with the Lord. He moved back from Vegas, and he was like, man, I was living in Vegas. I missed spending time with you, and we were such good friends. We're still friends, best friends to this day. One of my best friends, and I remember he was inviting me out to his birthday party in New York City, and he's like, "You gotta come out to New York. We're gonna do this birthday party for me and so and so." And I was just like, "I can't go." He's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "I can't go. It's at a club, and you guys are doing bottle service, and can't do it." And he was so discouraged and so disappointed in me, because he was like, "How can you do this? It's my birthday." I was like, "Listen, like, I would love for us to have a nice fun time, get a good meal somewhere, like a gentleman's dinner, whatever. Like, I love you, I care about you, but if I go into that environment, it won't only look bad if something gets on social media and be posted out there. Now I'm just starting this clean slate living, and the guy's next to doing bottle service, and not to mention the temptations that are in these specific arenas that I've been to. It doesn't sit well with me. I don't want to put myself in that position." So right away, I identified what was going to be possibly a hindrance to my growth in the Lord, which was a stance for me as a good witness. But also, I let him know, like, hey, I love and care about you. You know what's cool about that? Like, he may not have understood it right away, but he respected it. And years later, as I continued to model my love for the Lord and not just try to say, oh, I'm a really good Christian, look at me, because I have nothing against people meeting at a bar and having a burger. And everyone has different convictions. But if you have a former past of being an addict to something like alcohol and drugs, like, you got to know your audience and know the arena you're walking into. So years later, that same friend came to the Lord, right, and was receptive to prayer, was receptive to the things that I was doing, has always been behind the movement of this, not because he saw a legalistic point of view or saw a person that was judgmental. He saw, I believe, the love and the heart of the Father. And that wasn't me, right? I can't do that. That's God doing it through me and saying, like, I'm going to show you how to handle these situations with specific friendships. So that was one specific moment where I was like, man, like, I never would have predicted that. I always hoped for it. I prayed for my friends to come to know Jesus. Not all of them have done it yet. Some are on the fence, but some are there. A couple of them are living for the Lord now because of things that I took a stance on. So yes, it's like this bittersweet separation sometimes, because we can get codependent with certain friends or certain expectations of friendship. But there was literally a moment in time where Saturday nights, I was lonely. I had no one. I wasn't dating anyone. I had no friends because nobody could call me to drink anymore or party. I didn't know really anyone in the church yet. There wasn't a young adults group yet at our church, and it was a mega church. I was like, I hung out with old men. I hung out with 15 over guys, like 60 over. Like, I was just telling my wife last night, like, I had a guy come over and hey, do you want to come over to my house for donuts and we'll talk about reading the book of Acts? That was the stuff I was doing. So, like, I look at that season, and that was so fun and priceless because I needed to grow my relationship with God. I needed to learn how to hear his voice, how to read his word, and then do his word. So if anyone that was watching this is feeling that type of thing, like, oh man, this is so weird, it's not a restriction. All these things actually lead to freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. It's kind of like that idea. I think it's Romans 15 or 16 where, you don't want to bring a weaker believer, but it's kind of like the opposite of that, where you were potentially could have been that weaker believer, but you were just taking a stance against your friends, that not against your friends, but against the things that they were doing that you knew would have drug you back into that lifestyle. I think it's a very hard thing to do. And honestly, I would say, I would imagine that some of those 60-year-old guys that were pouring into you was part of the reason you were able to do that. Because, Matt, a lot of churches and different organizations want to be intergenerational, but few actually take that kind of embody that really. And so, I tell people all the time, one of the most valuable small groups that I've ever been a part of, which, just as a side note, that's how I got into youth ministry, through that small group. There was one couple 3-4 years older than me and my wife at the time, but the rest were, in their 40s and 50s, been married for 15, 20, 25 years. But as my wife and I were starting out in our marriage, a couple months deep, that was so valuable to us. And we never would have got that from surrounding ourselves with, other 20 somethings to hang out and play some board games. We never would have got that kind of experience. And so, that's another, I think like as young people, there's also like there's a standoff both ways a little bit. I think the older generation kind of feels like they might not be cool enough, or they might not know all the lingo, or whatever they feel like, or they don't dress the right way. But man, what I've noticed over the years is that it's more about the fact that people care for you, and not about their age or whether they know what no cap means or not. Like it's all about them pouring into you. And if we're receptive to that, then there is an army of that those believers that we can stand on the shoulders of. There's an army of them willing to pour in to the younger generation, and we don't have to just figure it out ourselves, which is great.